Today, I want to extend my sermon from last Sunday by continuing the conversation about community and the reality of our relational God. You may recall that I pointed out that the community of our God, our Trinitarian God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is bound in perfect unity, in love, to generate love that is shared with us. And this love became flesh and dwelt among us, revealed in the person of Jesus. Which is why we are Jesus people, who live the Jesus principles of hope, discipleship, care, and courage. But there's one more principle that holds it all together that I want to talk about today. It is trust. Right, that's the topic of today's sermon. It's trust. And how to live as a community that trusts one another, not because we hold a unity of opinion, but because we're Jesus people who care about one another with courage as disciples who live in hope. Because trust holds it all together. So let me tell you a story. I received an email recently from one of our vestry members, George Brumder, right here in church. And he sent me a link to a podcast via Notebook LM. And the podcast was hosted by a man and a woman, and they were discussing various aspects of, much to my surprise, Epiphany. Talking about evensong. They were talking about the history of evensong. They were talking about our theology of artificial intelligence. They were talking about our outreach programs and our children's ministry programs. It was pretty specific. And it took me about 7 minutes into this 11-minute podcast to realize that they weren't people. It was entirely generated by artificial intelligence, using data that's swept from our website to create a realistic, convincing conversation. And this both fascinated me and unsettled me, causing me to recognize that it is only a matter of time before one of those voices in that AI-generated podcast will be mine, but not me. And it's only a matter of time before my face is there having a conversation with an AI-generated host that is not me. It's only a matter of time before there is an AI avatar button on our phones that we can push when our sister calls, and she won't know she's not talking to me. So we are in the midst of a seismic shift. Seismic, and in this upheaval, trust is tenuous. Who and what can we trust? Right? What is true and what is not true? Who is real and who is not real? Anything digital will carry with it the possibility that it is not what it seems. Maybe we're already there, right? Which could account for the political polarization that we are experiencing even now. Maybe. Which brings me to another story. On Wednesday of this week, I got a telephone call from my son, Desmond, who's studying in Spain. And we talked about the election here in this country, and he shared with me some of the reflections of his friends there in Spain on the U.S. election. And then he said to me, "Dad, how you doing?" And I said, well, Des, things are a bit complicated here. I mean, some people at Epiphany are really hurting, and rightfully so, at the risk of what may happen to the choices they've made based on who's in the federal government. And there are others here who feel the election outcome was a net positive for the country. And there's everything in between. And I feel like I'm trying to catch a bolus. And he laughed and he said, Dad, you've got this. Now, for those of you that aren't studying in Spain, a bolas is a rope with weighted balls on either end that the gauchos would use to manage their livestock. And Desmond's words to me were, Dad, you've got this. And those were heartening words that gave me the courage to preach this sermon today about how we live together as a trusting community, even when opinions and experiences are as far apart as they could be. So how do you catch a bolus? How do you build community of real trust in a world where trust is tenuous and opinions far apart? Face to face, person to person, neighbor to neighbor, soul to soul. We start the journey by remembering the story of the AI-generated podcast and how in the not-too-distant future, if not today, not only will information be rendered unreliable, but the very voices and the faces will become suspect as well. But at Epiphany, we're ready, we're poised to catch the bolus because we are people who gather around two particular things that generate trust: worship and storytelling. These are practices that build communities of trust face to face and soul to soul. So you're wondering, how does worship build trust? Well, we do it together. We show up, don't we? We do the work. In fact, liturgy literally means the work of the people. And this work isn't organized to get us on the same page with one another, but rather as a communal spiritual exercise done together at the same time, in the same place, on the same day, singing the same hymns, saying the same prayers, standing together, kneeling together, sitting together, taking Eucharist together. This is worship. This work of worship acknowledges that we are a community on the same page, not necessarily with one another, but with God. God is the unity, and we are the community in which God dwells. And not because we share a particular point of view, but because we are all loved by God. Love is the foundation. And worship reminds us, as we gather together face to face, soul to soul, that there are no insiders and there are no outsiders in the kingdom of God. Worship reminds us that we are all in this together. And the firm foundation upon which we stand, when we get to the very bedrock, is love, the love of God. And the process of getting down there requires that we scrape away all the dirt and all the debris through the stories we tell. And this builds trust, not by right information or right doctrine or right belief, but by the acknowledgement of our common humanity. In the hearing and the telling of stories, we find ourselves standing as a community upon the firm foundation of God's love, irrespective of who people voted for. Now, Relata is a course we've developed here at Epiphany, designed precisely and intentionally. We thought about this almost a year ago to develop a class in anticipation of this very election that is about relationships and telling stories, face to face, soul to soul, to build trust. It was designed to knit community together, transcending difference as we seek the common connections by sharing the stories of our lives. And the tools we developed to knit this community back together are the needles of humanity, proximity, and the yarn of context. humanity, proximity, and the yarn of context. Now we're going to start, I want to talk about all three of those, but we're going to start by talking about the needle of humanity, which is a fundamental. It acknowledges that each person, anybody you've ever seen, anybody that's ever lived, is made in the image and likeness of God, imago Dei, and placed where we are placed providentially by God, which for you and me is right here, right now. Everyone carries the divine image of God, and it is seen when we see each other face to face. There is no conjuring imago Dei digitally. A soul must be experienced incarnationally. Which brings us naturally to the second needle for knitting community back together, which is proximity. Trustworthy community will require personal presence because we are incarnational beings. To be born is to have a soul. The Christian community is built on this reality. The Word became flesh and dwells among us with a name that is Jesus, embodied, personal, and present. And as the digital realm becomes less trustworthy, the need for places to gather and be known becomes more and more necessary for the health and wholeness of humanity. Now, for those of you watching online, I understand that sometimes we're stuck at home and we're limited in our capacity for face-to-face proximity. And so we find spiritual nurturing online, and that is good, and that's okay as far as it goes. But I still want to encourage all of you somewhere in your life, somehow, if you can, to find soul-to-soul connection, even if it can't be here with your church community. And finally, using this knitting metaphor, there's the yarn of context. And knowing context is to know the story. And to know somebody's story is to give you insight to their life and hopefully generate empathy for them. You with me? Let me give you an example. So knowing that the person last Sunday at the 8:45 service who corrected me during the sermon by yelling out 47 when I said 43 was my sister generates empathy for me. And to give you further context, to know that she got in trouble from my mom who was watching online may bring you the same joy it brings me. But to give you further context still, I'm alert to the fact that that same mom will probably mention something to me about teasing my sister from the pulpit. Context. Life is complicated. But to know one's story helps create understanding, which makes space to share with people in their anxiety and their joy. And that is so important for a community that cares for one another. And so with these knitting needles of humanity and proximity and the yarn of context, we knit community together by the stories we tell face to face and the work of worship we do soul to soul. Which is why with a great deal of confidence I can say, Epiphany, we've got this. We've got this. Like we're drawn together here not by accident, but by God's providential design. And it's a holy calling to be a community that can stop the spinning of polarization and catch the bolus. Because when the bolus stops, trust starts. And safe space is made for everybody. And that's what we do here at Epiphany, and it's mostly super easy, and sometimes it's a little bit hard. As I told Desmond last week, in times like these, it can be a little complicated truly to be the rector of Epiphany. Lex knows. Right? Holding a disparate community together as the bull spins. Sometimes it feels a little bit like Captain Kirk on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. You know what I'm talking about? Things are shaking, right? And the Klingons are firing at the ship. Or you're being dragged into a black hole and the ship's coming apart. And you yell down the stairs of Christie House, or up the stairs of Christie House, or across the courtyard to the music room, and you say, "Give me more power! Give me more power, Zach!" And I hear back, "Aye, aye, Captain. We've got this. We've got this." And we've got this because we have an extraordinary team on this campus. And that's what your annual pledge pays for, incidentally. A fabulous, seasoned team that's always ready to shout back, "We've got this." And they always do. And trust me, face to face, soul to soul, the team we have here at Epiphany Parish is as exceptional as any team working in any church in the United States right now. And the reason we can keep that team together is because of your pledge. And so I ask you, when you're thinking about your pledge, even if you've already thought about it, remember how that supports our capacity to have it when times are tough. We're in a changing world. We are in a changing world right now, and we are going to need, more than ever before, I believe, vital, thoughtful, dynamic churches. More probably than we've needed over the past 1,000 years. And you are what makes that happen in this place. As the capacity to discern truth shapeshifts right in front of us, I want you to be mindful of the God that dwells with us, connecting us incarnationally, face to face, soul to soul. Honored in worship, known in stories, knit together by humanity, proximity, and context, creating in our midst trusting community necessary for living those Jesus core principles of hope, discipleship, care, and courage. Not always easy. It is not always easy, but it is critically important. And I think here at Epiphany, we got this.